Hi everybody, happy to meet you again with an interesting area of human development, personality. We human beings are the same in certain ways by having human bodies, human minds, human thoughts and human feelings. But in many other ways, each and every one of us are different from others and possesses certain unique qualities. This is where the term personality sets in. At the end of this module, you will be able to understand and define personality, illustrate the web of entanglement and complexity of personality as proposed by Freud in terms of levels of consciousness, components of human mind, and the third as psychosexual stages of development. The last learning outcome would be to apprehend the psychoanalytic approach towards its application to the teaching and learning area of children in their early years. What is personality? Before we get into the Freud's theory on personality, let us try to understand the concept of so commonly used term personality. The word personality originated from the Latin word persona, meaning mask. This mask referred to the theatrical mask of performers, projecting various roles by disguising their identity. As personality does not have one final definition, it could be defined in various ways. But now, let us see how the personality is defined in relation to its focus. Whether the focus is on the individual or on human being as a whole. When the focus is on human beings as a whole, the term personality is defined as observable psychological variations among the individuals. It would include appearance and build in physical terms and social and emotional behavioral characteristics in psychological terms. However, when the focus is on the individual, then it is defined as a person's way of being and its consistency. It would include perceiving, thinking, acting and reacting skills of that individual. Hence, after realizing that people differ from each other in meaningful ways and at the same time seem to show some consistency in behavior, the term personality could be defined as a unique combination of patterns, tendencies and inclinations that influence behavior, thought, motivation and emotions in a human being. But one has to realize that these patterns over time do strongly influence the personal expectations, self-perceptions, values and attitudes of that individual. When we look at the definition, it is well understood that the patterns or traits of thoughts and emotion make up the personality. Is that all? If not only them, then what are the other characteristics that make up a personality? The fundamental features of personality are consistency. It is the extent to which an individual reacts in a similar fashion under various situations or circumstances is referred to as the consistency of behavior. The second is psychological and physiological foundations of personality. Though personality in psychology is considered to be a psychological construct, it is equally influenced by the physiological facts. The third is personality strongly influences behaviors and action. The overall personality of an individual allows him to move, respond and act towards his environment. So, personality strongly influences behaviors and actions. Personality is expressed in various ways. Personality could be expressed in various ways such as in behaviors, thoughts, feelings, intimate and non-intimate relationships. Several psychologists have proposed various theories on how personalities develop. However, looking into the pros and cons of all these theories, it was considered to dwell into the psychological aspect of personality, because this type of theory has got major implications on the personality development of young children. Hence, let us look into the Sigmund Freud's personality theory in this module and Erik Erikson's theory in the next module. Psychoanalytic theory of Freud is a web of entanglement and complexity with some basic concepts and principles reflecting personality. The basic assumption of this theory is that the behavior of a human being is just determined by irrational forces, aggressive or sexual desires, and not by free will. Hence, the human behavior is said to be deterministic by nature. Freud strongly believed that every human being is an actor in the drama of his or her own mind, pushed by desire and pulled by coincidence. Freud, who proposed this theory, argued that the conscious mind shapes behavior and personality through the interaction between three major components of mind: id, ego, and superego. And these dynamic interactions carry a human being through 5 psychosexual stages of development. Hence, for easy understanding and better comprehension, let us divide Freud's theory into 3 major categories as shown to you. The first one being levels of consciousness, second, components of human mind, and the third, psychosexual stages of development. Levels of consciousness is a mental map of the human mind that describes the degree to which mental events such as thoughts, fantasies, experiences vary in relation to the axis of its awareness level. Based on the level, Freud proposed that human mind has 3 portions, namely conscious, preconscious, and unconscious. Now, let us see each level of awareness in detail. Conscious level of awareness comprises of events that a person is aware of. In other words, the current events of the mind that a person can actively think at that moment constitute conscious domain. This could also be referred as the working memory in terms of information processing approach. The events in this level are easily accessible and are being regulated by external cues. The next is preconscious level. This level of consciousness bridges between the conscious and the unconscious regions of the human mind. It comprises of events or contents of the mind that a human being is not currently aware of. However, the contents, namely thoughts, memories, knowledge, wishes, feelings, etc., could be made available whenever needed. They are in the process of becoming conscious. Hence, this level is also referred to as the available memory in the information processing approach. Next is unconscious level. This level comprises of events that are kept out of conscious awareness. This level is said to be a submerged, deepest major stratum of human mind and serves as a storehouse for all primitive instinctual drives, emotions, and memories. The unconscious level is found to operate on the process that actively help in keeping those primitive thoughts from awareness. Freud found that there is always a conflict between the unconscious memory and the consciousness, and the conflict is watched and bridged by the middle level preconscious. In developing the psychoanalytic approach, Freud modified the topographical model of human mind and renamed the term unconscious as id. This new terminology was found to have high clarity, as you will understand in the next part of the module, that is the components of personality of the human mind. Freud also found that the other 2 parts of the human mind are both partly conscious and partly unconscious. However, the topographical model was never abandoned by Freud. This topographical model was later converted to the iceberg metaphor, which is a commonly used visual for explaining the relationship between the topographical models, that's a various level of consciousness, and the components of human mind, id, ego, and superego. The iceberg clearly shows that the id or the unconscious is completely submerged in the underwater portion, and the other two levels with the representation of ego and superego being displaced above the water level. The subsequent section of the module details the components of personality or human mind, the conflict between those components, and the process of resolving the conflict. According to Freud, the personality structure or the psyche or the mind of a person, after modifying the topographical model, acts and interacts with three parts, namely id, ego and superego. This modified model was referred as a structural model of human mind. Let us see each part in detail. The word id is a Latin word meaning it. It is the unorganized part of the personality structure of a person that comprises of impulsive, basic, instinctual drives of a human being. It is a childlike portion of the mind. Of all the three components, it is the only component that is present from birth. Hence, it represents bodily needs, wants, desires and impulses that do not care about the demands or expectations of reality and without any accordance to what is right or wrong. According to Freud, it is the unconscious part of the human mind seeking pleasure. Hence, it acts according to pleasure principle. Pleasure principle is defined as a psychic force that demands immediate gratification of any desire or impulse without showing a single sign of willingness to compromise. The process of thinking that the id undergoes is called primary process. This process refers to the illogical, irrational fantasy form of thought, wherein a person's need is translated to wish, instincts or drives. Hence, id is a form of mind that is completely cut off from the external world and operated with its own perception. The word ego is also a Latin word meaning I. It is the organized, realistic portion of the personality structure of a person. The ego separates out what is real or right and what is fantasy or wrong, and then organize the thought by being sensitive to the demands or expectations of the reality. Hence, ego is said to be a part of it that had been modified by the direct influence of external cues. At the beginning, Freud meant ego as a sense of self. But later he identified the meaning of ego with a set of functions, namely judgment, tolerance, reality testing, control, planning, etc. Ego resides in all levels of awareness. Ego functions as a reality principle. Reality principle refers to the ego operating with a regulatory mechanism and thereby seeks to please its drive in realistic ways in tune with the expectations of the external world. For example, don't you think to purchase an item instead of grabbing it from someone else? Also, ego enables the individual to delay the gratification process and function effectively in the real world. The process adapted by ego is called secondary process. It is a process wherein the ego searches for realistic solutions to satisfy the wishes that the id creates. Hence, it is well understood that ego is always trying to mediate between id and reality. Freud always compared the concept of id and ego with a horse and its rider respectively, where the driver has to have a hold to check the superior strength of the horse. The third part of the human mind is superego. It is the organized, moralist and idealistic part of personality structure of a person. It aims at perfection, reflects the internalization of values taught by parents, educators, teachers or even role models. Superego resides in the pre-conscious level of awareness. As the superego strives towards perfection and enables a person to act in a socially appropriate manner, it is always in contradiction with the id that needs immediate gratification. Hence, the ego between the id and the superego faces a tough time in arriving at behavior. The superego can be thought as conscience that punishes the wrong behavior with feelings of guilt. Hence, it is referred to as an angel on one's shoulder. Superego operates on ideal principle, otherwise called morality principle. This principle refers to the internalized conventions and morals formed from environment cues and experiences. However, ideal principle starts forming at 4 to 5 years of age. Freud separates superego into two aspects. One is conscience and the other is ego ideal. Conscience are ideals and morals of the society, preventing people from acting as per their internal drives. Those are learned by a child after internalizing the punishments and warnings faced. Ego ideal is otherwise called ideal self, which is derived from rewards and positive models presented by the society to the child. As proposed by Freud, every human being at every moment of his or her life has to strive to resolve the conflict between the three components of personality: id, ego, and superego. For example, consider the situation of a child. An obese child who is warned by his doctor to be on a strict diet looks at pizza. His instinct, that's id, craves for it, with his mind telling him, I need it. But his superego, which is always a perfectionist, tells him, no way you can have it. You are on diet. But the ego that is found in between the id and the superego tries to balance their desires by setting a dynamic, realistic equilibrium by allowing the child to eat pizza, but with the condition of exercising the next morning to get rid of the excess calories. Hence, the ego strikes a balance between superego and id in order to maintain a healthy state of consciousness. Therefore, the human being is protected from not doing things that are distorting reality and thereby prevents the unconscious dangerous thoughts and feelings from getting into the conscious level of awareness. However, before the ego steps in to be the referee between these components, much anxiety and stress occur. Ego defends itself against anxiety by using certain strategies referred to as defense mechanism, thereby lowering the anxiety level and restoring the person to reality. Sigmund Freud observed a number of defense mechanisms, but it is daughter Anna Freud who elaborated on it. But let us see some major defense mechanisms in the next module on personality. Now, let us continue understanding the third part of Freud's theory, called the psychosexual stages of development. Freud, while working with troubled adults, looked deeply into how their childhood experiences and dreams contributed to their personality in adulthood. Based on this, Freud defined 5 basic stages of development, with each stage directly related to a physical center of pleasure, and termed it as psychosexual theory of development. Also, his theory talks about the conflict that arises at every stage due to the biological drives and social expectations of that stage. He also concludes that the functioning and coping ability of an individual in his adulthood largely depends on his or her ability to resolve the conflict during these 5 stages. Before getting into the details of these stages, it is important to be familiar with certain Freudian terms that explain these stages. The first is erogenous zone. It refers to the physical center of pleasure. The erogenous zone of each stage is different. The second is libido. It's a sexual drive that a child experiences at every stage of development. Third is psychological fixation. While trying to gratify the sexual desire, that's a libido, the child faces parental and societal disapproval and thereby becomes anxious. In order to avoid this anxiety, the child gets fixated or preoccupied with the psychological characteristic of that erogenous zone and even being carried out in the adulthood stage. Now let us see each of the already mentioned 5 stages in detail. First stage is oral stage. It's a first stage spanning from birth until the age of 1 year. The erogenous zone of libidinal gratification at this stage is the mouth. The infant at this stage finds pleasure from feeding at the mother's breast or the nipple of the bottle, and also from his or her oral exploration of the environment. The oral explorations are by sucking his or her own fingers or putting objects in the mouth. At this stage, out of the three components of human mind, the two components ego and superego is not developed, and hence id dominates. So each behavior of an infant is based on the pleasure principle. The goal at this stage is to develop proper amount of sucking, eating, biting and talking initiatives. The infant gets fixated in the oral stage when there is too much or too little gratification of the desire, and he or she grows into an immature adult. The oral stage fixation results in passive, gullible, immature, manipulative personality, and the consequences of this fixation would be over drinking, smoking, nail biting or other mouth-based aggressive behaviors. The second is anal stage, that spans from the age of 18 months to 3 years. Now the child's erogenous zone changes from mouth to the anus. In other words, the zone changes from the upper digestive tract to the lower digestive tract. Hence, the focus of a toddler at this stage is all concerned with bowel and bladder elimination and thereby its control. By the age of 2, the key anal stage experience of any child is toilet training. While experiencing the training, the child's id demands immediate gratification, whereas the ego demands delayed gratification. Hence, a conflict between id and ego sets in. However, the parenting style influences the resolution of id-ego conflict. An ideal parenting style with moderate demands, teaching the value and importance of physical cleanliness, along with proper toilet training practices, would help in the ideal resolution of the id-ego conflict, which in turn facilitates the development of a self-controlled adult. Too much or too little gratification at this stage would lead to compulsive anal retentive personality or self-indulgent or anal compulsive personality. The first one of compulsive or anal retentive personality, the moderate demands of the parents on the child and overemphasis on toilet training leads to over-concern with neatness and order in the child. This is called as compulsive or anal retentive personality. The next is self-indulgent or anal compulsive personality. If the parent yields or over-responds to the id of the child, that is, immediate gratification, the child might develop a sense of personal untidiness, environmental disorder, and a weak sense of self respectively. This disorder is called self-indulgent or anal compulsive personality. The reason behind this personality type is that it is only the parents who control things and not the child's ego. The third stage is phallic stage. It spans between 3 to 6 years of age. The primary erogenous zone changes from the anal region to the genital parts of the child. As children at this stage become aware of their own bodies, their parents and others, they learn the physical difference between a boy and a girl. According to Freud, the child at this stage develops sexual desires towards his or her parent. The psychosocial experience that develops because of the sexual desire is termed different for boys and girls. For boys, it is called Oedipus complex, and for girls, it is called Electra complex. Oedipus complex is the son-father competition for possession of mother. Electra complex is the daughter-mother competition for the possession of father. Though Freud's theory in this area is still not accepted, we could still find the boys at this age are much attached to their mother and girls to their father. The goal at this stage is to master the internal conflict for the opposite sex parent and thereby moving towards appropriate sexual desires. Unresolved conflict causes phallic stage fixation with different effects for boys and girls. Among boys, the fixation might lead them to be an aggressive, over-ambitious, but vain man. Among girls, the fixation would lead to the development of a woman who strives hard to dominate men with very high but dangerous self-esteem, or else she becomes an over-submissive woman with very low self-esteem. Hence, the parenting style adopted plays an important role in solving this conflict and developing appropriate superego of the child. The fourth stage is latency stage. It spans from the age of 6 years until puberty. This period is called latency because the sexual desires are hidden or lies dormant. Thus, no erogenous zone manifests. However, it is only the consolidation of the other 3 previous stages. The child at this stage derives pleasure of gratification only by means of secondary process of thinking. This sort of thinking allows them to learn, adjust to the social environment outside and as well as inside the house, absorb the culture, forming beliefs and values, developing same-sex friendships, engaging in sports, etc. Any unresolved conflict at this stage, called as neurosis or fixation, are only due to the unresolved Oedipus complex or Electra conflict, and even with the inability of the ego to allow the child to focus on the socially acceptable activities. The fifth stage is genital stage. It spans from puberty through the adulthood period. Also, this stage marks the maximum lifespan of a human being as per Freud. The erogenous zone, of course, is the genitals, but influenced by the sexual hormones secreted. The main difference between the phallic and the genital stage is that the ego in the genital stage gets well established, and hence the adolescent could shift his or her primary instinctual gratification by means of secondary process thinking aided in the latency stage. This secondary process of thinking allows them to gratify their desire by means of friendship, love relationship, family and adult responsibilities. The major goal of any adolescent at this stage is to establish successful relationship with peers. If this goal is not achieved, the adolescent gets fixated and tends to have unsuccessful relationship as an adult. Now on to the implications on learning and teaching of this Freud's theory. With the discovery of the unconscious level of awareness, Freud has contributed a lot to psychology and learning, though his theory was not accepted in all aspects. There are 2 major implications of his whole theory with particular reference to teaching and learning in the early years. The first one is that the unconscious domain of the human mind, as identified by Freud, serves as an intrinsic motivation for every child to learn and explore the environment. Second is that the idea of Freud on inner conflict that affects one's behavior gains importance in teaching on the part of the teacher. The teacher has to realize a foremost duty in putting in more efforts to solve the inner conflicts among children by providing ample attention towards their certain important basic needs. For example, in the latency stage, play is the only source of directing their impulse. Hence, sufficient opportunity should be provided by the teacher to every child, as children spend most of their waking time in school. Towards the end of the module, I hope you would have understood that, according to Freud, human behavior is just the result of interaction between id, ego and superego, and how the 3 levels of awareness play a major role in shaping the behavior and personality of an individual. Moreover, the module has also brought out how these dynamic interactions between the parts of the human mind and levels of awareness carries human beings through the 5 psychosexual stages of development. Hence, it is imperative to understand the importance of smooth and successful transition from one stage to the other in developing personality. Though this theory has met with several criticisms, it has got its own contributions. Furthermore, this theory, though did not provide direct implications on education, the decision and guidance is still on the teachers of how they use the psychoanalytic knowledge in assisting their students. This is Arokya Maraicelvi signing off for today. Hope to meet you again in the next module.